It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. Good morning, everyone. So if you follow the news closely enough, even like Sunday night and early Monday morning, maybe you've heard by now about President Trump's latest flip-flop on releasing the Epstein files. He was for it as a candidate when he couldn't release them, then against it when he became president, and he could. You probably know that much. Now it looked like he would get embarrassed by lots of House Republicans voting against him and for the release. He suddenly recommended last night in a social media post that the House should vote for it. Now, if they do, I guess he can declare victory instead of defeat, right? We'll talk more about the politics and the new revelations from last week about Trump's involvement with and knowledge of the Epstein crimes. But in light of that content, I thought it might be good to start with a very brief reminder of what we're talking about when we talk about Jeffrey Epstein. This is a short clip of the journalist Julie K. Brown from the Miami Herald, who spoke about Epstein on NPR's Weekend Edition yesterday. She reported more on Epstein than anyone. She was asked about Epstein having so many friends in high places while being a serial abuser of minors.
I think that it shows that he's a great manipulator, and that also, could you imagine if he's able to manipulate some of the top people in the world? Could you imagine what he must have done with these young girls who were 13 and 14 years old, and how he must have been able to manipulate them into believing somehow that he was going to help them with their lives? I mean, that is the sad part about it. He was the mastermind behind this sex trafficking network that led to the abuse of hundreds of women and girls that came from troubled backgrounds.
Julie K. Brown, hundreds of victims as young as 13 and 14, she reports. Just so we know what we're talking about for some basic context, because it doesn't always get stated so explicitly like Julie K. Brown did there. More often now people just say like pedophile Jeffrey Epstein and things like that. So there are these files that apparently the Justice Department has. When Trump was running for president last year, podcaster Lex Friedman asked him if he would release the files if elected. This clip sometimes gets cited as Trump promising to do so, and he kind of does. But you'll hear how much, even last year, he was trying to hedge it when Friedman backs him into a corner with this follow-up.
It's just very strange for a lot of people that the list of clients that went to the island has not been made public.
Yeah, it's very interesting, isn't it? Probably will be, by the way. Probably.
So if you're able to, you'll be...
Yeah, I'd certainly take a look at it. Now, Kennedy's interesting because it's so many years ago. You know, they do that for danger, too, because, you know, it endangers certain people, et cetera, et cetera. So Kennedy is very different from the Epstein thing. But, yeah, I'd be inclined to do the Epstein. I'd have no problem with it.
I'd have no problem with it, is the part that everyone quotes like it was a campaign promise. But you heard how uncomfortable he was with saying yes in any way. He tried to refocus the conversation on Kennedy files, but then probably felt he had to land on, I'd have no problem with it. So then he's elected, and he starts to call the Epstein issue as it pertains to him a Democratic Party hoax. You've heard that in recent weeks. But it's not because it's not a Democratic Party hoax, because it has some of the most conservative members of Congress urging the files be released, too, like Congressman Thomas Massie of Kentucky, who went on ABC's This Week program yesterday.
In 2030, he's not going to be the president, and you will have voted to protect pedophiles if you don't vote to release these files, and the president can't protect you.
Thomas Massie, another of those conservative members ready to vote to release the Epstein files, as many of you know by now, Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia, previously one of Trump's biggest boosters in the House, now drawing a derisive nickname, as if she was Hillary Clinton or somebody, a derisive nickname she says has drawn death threats to her.
Marjorie Taylor Greene. I don't think her life is in danger. Frankly, I don't think anybody cares about her.
Marjorie Taylor green now, according to Trump. Now, when you call somebody a traitor, that's usually supposed to mean they sold out your country, right? I guess in this case, it means she sold out Trump's desire to keep something, and nobody's quite sure what. But it sure looks like he has a strong desire to keep something as a wonderful secret. But now, as of last night, he jumped to the front of the parade and said, I'm for it. Nothing to hide. Release the Epstein files. Go ahead and vote that way, members of Congress. And by the way, in case you missed it, and you may well have, because it may have been designed for you to miss it, the Epstein files flip was the second instance of Trump backing down this weekend in a classic Friday evening news dump. You know about those? Politicians of all kinds do it. Corporations do it. Because people don't follow the news as much on the weekend, people release like the worst stuff that they feel they need to release about them on Friday evening. So in this case, at that time, the president announced that he will reverse tariffs on certain common food items, including coffee, bananas, and beef, after the Democrats did so well in the elections, partly on affordability promises that voters felt Trump had failed to keep, right? So the president, who ran on winning so much you'll get tired of winning, took those two losses in the last few days. With us now, Eleanor Mueller, congressional reporter for the news organization Semafor. Eleanor, thanks for coming on. Welcome back to WNYC.
Thanks for having me, Brian.
So when can we expect a vote in the House on releasing the Epstein files?
We're not quite sure yet. The thinking is it could happen as soon as tomorrow, but you're exactly right that the tide was already turning in favor of several House Republicans voting in favor of this, even though only the four, including Marjorie Taylor Greene and Thomas Massie, actually signed on to the discharge petition that forced Speaker Mike Johnson to take up this bill this week.
For people who may be confused, what's the difference between the Epstein files the House will be voting on, which includes the list, I guess, whatever the list actually is that was referred to in one of the clips, the difference between the Epstein files the House will be voting on and the big Epstein emails release that Democrats were able to make public last week?
Yeah, so this has been House Republican leadership's defense all along. They've said that because the Oversight Committee under their leadership has started already obtaining some of these emails from the Justice Department, making them public, as we saw recently from the Democrats. They released that email that called Trump, quote unquote, the dog that had not barked. Damning stuff. House leadership has taken that and said, well, we don't really need to vote for the Justice Department to release any more files because we already have these documents thanks to our efforts. The bill that's coming up this week, thanks to Thomas Massie, Marjorie Taylor Greene, others who signed onto that discharge petition, would require the Justice Department to release all of the files. So that's basically a power that even the Oversight Committee at this point does not have, has not executed, and would in theory produce many more documents than the ones that we've seen so far.
A couple of listeners are starting to call in and text about this already. Listeners, so you have the number, 212-433-WNYC, 212-433-9692, with Eleanor Mueller from Semafor. I want to run down some of the breakout quotes, and you just mentioned one. And I want to go over that one and a few others and what they might mean, quotes that pertain to Trump in these emails, and ask you to help us understand what they seem to say or imply about the president and what they don't. We'll take these chronologically. In 2011, Epstein had gotten out of jail after his first conviction relating to his behavior. It was a relatively minor charge compared to what he was actually suspected of. It was one count of soliciting prostitution and one count of soliciting prostitution from someone under the age of 18, as the AP describes it in a story. AP says he was sentenced to 18 months in jail under a secret arrangement. AP says the U.S. Attorney's Office agrees not to prosecute Epstein for federal crimes. Now, that would have been during the Bush administration, 2008. AP continues, Epstein serves most of his sentence in a work release program that allows him to leave jail during the day to go to his office, then return at night. So he's out of jail in 2011 and emails his accomplice, who was later convicted herself, Ghislaine Maxwell. Epstein writes, I want you to realize that dog that hasn't barked is Trump. What can you say about that reference to Trump as that dog that hasn't barked? Barked about what? How clear is it?
That is exactly the question that we're seeing congressional Democrats and even those House Republicans like Thomas Massey, Marjorie Taylor Greene raise. I think in that same batch of emails, he's also said that Trump, quote, spent hours at my house alongside one of Epstein's survivors. And so obviously we do not have the full context. We do not know exactly the meaning, especially without this fuller batch of documents, but it's certainly, I think, not a good look for the White House.
Right. Yeah. Same batch, 2011, reference to a victim or survivor who, as you say, quote, spent hours at my house with him being Trump. The name of the victim, and I guess this is important, the name of the victim is redacted in what the Democrats released last week. Trump claims it was the late Virginia Giuffre who wrote about her Epstein horror story, but notably did not accuse Trump of anything. But we don't know if Trump is telling the truth that it was Giuffre. Do you know anything more about what that text refers to, about a victim who Epstein wrote spent hours at my house with Trump, or if the Democrats needed to redact the name?
They needed to redact the name. So this is another reason that House Republican leaders have been citing as why they can't vote to release all of the Justice Department's files. They've said that they've basically expressed that they hold concerns that some of these women could be exposed by having either their names or other personal identifying information in them released. And so this is what the supporters of releasing these documents have been doing, is they've been, meticulous about redacting names, redacting personal information. And if this bill that will get a vote later this week ends up getting enacted, it'll be the same thing. The Justice Department will be required to remove any information that could identify the victims before they put these documents out there.
So Trump could be lying that it's Virginia Giuffre, because then that would clearly not incriminate him in terms of actual, sex or molestation or whatever it would be called with her, because she wrote a book and did not accuse Trump of anything when she said a lot about other people. But we don't know, right? He could just be making this up because he can make it up and not get caught, or maybe it really is her.
Yeah, we don't know and we won't know. Of course, I mean, many of Epstein's survivors are still alive. They're still involved in this process. And so maybe some of these documents come out and they opt to come forward and clarify their role, maybe others' roles that they knew about, who they feel would be comfortable with them sharing. But at this point, there's a lot of uncertainty.
So those were from 2011, years before Trump runs for president. Now we'll jump ahead to 2015. Trump is starting to run for president, and Epstein is having an exchange with journalist Michael Wolff, who's writing a biography of Epstein. Michael Wolff, I hear CNN planning to ask Trump tonight about his relationship with you. Epstein, if we were able to craft an answer for him, what do you think it should be? Then Wolff also wrote, if it really looks like he could win, you could save him, generating a debt. Do you have anything on that? The notion that Jeffrey Epstein thought he could save Trump in any way in his presidential campaign? Save him from what?
It's a fantastic question. And it's fascinating to look back now a couple of days ago to when Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene was posting about the Epstein files before Trump attacked her on Truth Social, saying that he revoked his endorsement of her, et cetera. She said there's no proof to her knowledge in any of these documents that Trump is implicated or involved in any way. And I think, this batch of emails released by the Democrats on the House Oversight Committee would certainly indicate otherwise. And this is one of those examples.
And one more. Epstein emailed Michael Wolff in 2019 about Trump. Trump is president now at this time. Quote, of course he knew about the girls. And that quote has really jumped out. 2019, of course he knew about the girls. 2019 is the year Epstein is arrested again, this time on more serious sex trafficking charges, and he dies by suicide in his jail cell. At very least, assuming Epstein's email is true, it appears to catch Trump in a lie when he said this in 2019.
No, I had no idea. I had no idea. I haven't spoken to him in many, many years, but I did have no idea.
No idea what was going on. So there's the apparent lie if Epstein's email is accurate. And I guess my question about that quote, of course Trump knew about the girls, is if we take that to mean Trump knew about Epstein's sex trafficking, or at that point alleged sex trafficking, because he was only charged before he killed himself, what would Trump or any person's responsibility be under the law to report that to the police? I realize you're a congressional reporter, Eleanor. You're not a lawyer or a legal analyst, but have you heard anybody talk about this? What would Trump or any person's responsibility be under the law to report that to the police if they knew about sex trafficking, and particularly of minors?
Presumably they would be liable in some way, especially with, such extensive now documentation seemingly of that knowledge. It's worth noting that these emails come from Jeffrey Epstein's estate. So this is an entirely separate bucket than the Justice Department emails that would be released if this bill this week gets enacted. And so we could get a much more fulsome picture quite soon here.
So there could even be a crime in that case, failure to report. I don't know if the statute of limitations would have run out, but at least in theory, it could have been, if all that's accurate, criminal negligence on the part of then President Donald Trump. But it might just be really bad for Trump politically, at very least because it would be ethically so bad if it's true. But it could even be criminal, is what I think you're saying.
I am not positive, but it certainly seems like something that would be within the realm of possibility. And again, this is Congresswoman's green point repeatedly, is she thinks Trump is dramatically underestimating just how important this is to the MAGA base. And so even if the repercussions here are solely political, I think those will still be something significant that he has to grapple with.
And that, I guess, is where we are today. One more thing about this, though. Even if Congress does vote to release the Epstein files, Trump may still have another trick up his sleeve to prevent the release that he claims to be for. And if you take a step back, this might be as bad as anything in terms of plundering democracy, Epstein particulars aside, because after the email dump last week, he got Attorney General Pam Bondi to launch an investigation of Epstein-related activity only of Democrats. He got the Attorney General, like on a snap his fingers, moment's notice, it seems like, to launch an investigation of Epstein-related activity only of Democrats, Bill Clinton and a few others. So listen to what Republican Congressman Thomas Massie had to say about that yesterday on ABC This Week.
If they have ongoing investigations in certain areas, those documents can't be released. So this might be a big smokescreen.
Eleanor, that clip really made my ears perk up. So might we be headed to a moment soon where Trump can say, I'm for the release of all the Epstein files, but we can't make them public now because they're part of a criminal investigation?
That is certainly the thinking of the Congress people who have backed this push. I think whether or not it turns out to be true, we'll have to wait to see until it's enacted. And the Justice Department has to respond to being asked to release all of these files. Of course, the House vote this week is just the first step that then also goes to the Senate. And then also, in theory, Trump could veto it. Now, Congressman Massie told me Wednesday night he doesn't think Trump will veto it. He said, it's one thing to privately lobby against these files coming out. It's another thing to quite publicly and bearing the full political brunt of that action, veto the bill. So we'll see. But either way, the Justice Department has a little more time here to maneuver as far as potentially circumventing this legislation.
Raul in East Elmhurst, you're on WNYC. Hi, Raul. Thank you for calling in.
Good morning, Brian, and good morning to your guests. Thank you so much for this topic. I've been wanting to say something. I heard another public radio station, someone that have been looking into it, studying from the very beginning. I'm very disappointed. I mean, this system is just not right. but Obama knew about it. Biden knew about it. Why did they not release those freaking files? So now, now Trump doesn't want to release them. Trump doesn't want to release it. All of this stuff. People are guilty, but why did not Biden and Obama release the files? That's what I want to know.
That's a fair question. Does anybody know the answer to that, Eleanor?
Well, it's certainly something that we've seen House Republicans seize on as they urge their colleagues to vote for the release of the files. I think Marjorie Taylor Greene, I keep bringing her up, but she's such an interesting figure in all of this, actually posted a screenshot over the weekend of her text to Donald Trump saying, we've always wanted this because we know there's Democrats implicated and we know that they've opted until now to not release them themselves. And so why would we as Republicans not pursue the release? And so obviously that's not an opinion Trump shared, at least not until last night when he posted that House Republicans should actually vote for this bill. But it's certainly something that's given them a useful political tool as they advocate for these documents to come out.
Right. So, I mean, I think a lot of Americans would believe they should investigate, whether it's a criminal investigation under the Attorney General or a congressional investigation or both. And let the chips fall where they may, right? If any Democrats did anything horrible with respect to anything that Jeffrey Epstein did, let the chips fall where they may, but same with Republicans. So have you reported it on? Again, I realize you're a congressional reporter, you're not a Justice Department reporter, but that really raises questions, doesn't it, when he can ask the Justice Department to launch an investigation only of Democrats on any particular issue?
Absolutely. I mean, this is a broader pattern that we've seen throughout Trump's second administration of weaponizing his departments to go after his political enemies. We've seen it with Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook. We've seen it with New York Attorney General Letitia James. He's really pushing the boundaries of what he can do within the executive branch to go after these people who either he disagrees with or who have attacked him or whose absence would benefit him politically. And I do think we hit a wall eventually in terms of whether or not he can actually follow through on some of these things.
Yeah. So I guess partly in answer to the caller's question, I think the politics of this have been, and you're closer to it, so tell me if we need to reframe this. The politics for a number of years before Trump and since Trump hit the scene as a presidential candidate and then president has been, because they would be difficult to release, the Republicans were making it look like a Democratic conspiracy to cover something up, because maybe Bill Clinton was implicated in something, who knows, or Lawrence Summers, another name that Trump mentioned and wants Pam Bondi to investigate. Maybe Democrats did do something, some Democrats, and so they wanted the political narrative out there, the Republicans did, that, the Democrats won't release this. But because there may have been Republicans implicated too, they didn't really want it released. They just wanted the issue. And now that they have the power to release it, and some Republicans like Massey and Marjorie Taylor Greene are getting on board, it seems like Trump is getting nervous, because whether or not he committed any sexual crimes himself, he's acting like there's something that he doesn't want people to see in there. So the politics have flipped from, let's have this great conspiracy theory out there that people can come to conclusions about without any actual evidence, to now that the evidence might be released. Oh, we can't do that. Does that make sense?
I think that's right. And it's worth noting that the momentum on the Democratic side certainly seems to be behind release these files, even if they do implicate members of our own party. Every single House Democrat signed on to the discharge petition that forced this vote this week. And it's really primarily on the GOP side and primarily because of Trump that we're seeing this hesitance.
Dave in East Irvington. Is that New York or New Jersey? Which Irvington?
That's New York. I thought if I called it East Irvington, maybe it would start clicking that we're not to be confused with New Jersey.
Right.
I was just typing it up for
So
my-
East Irvington would be closer to the Sawmill River Parkway and not so close to the river, right?
Exactly. We're very close to the Sawmill Parkway. It's a great place to live if anybody. But no, I shouldn't advertise that because we're trying to get my son to find a house up here. We don't want to meet our competitors. Very hard. Anyway, moving on to the. I was just typing it up for my daughter, so I have a little bit of it in front of me, and hopefully I can explain it. One is a question, which I think is the less important item, and I see it. Even that's a little confusing. The question has to do with the provenance of the files, whether they can be, we can be assured that there's no way they could be monkeyed with like Rosemary Woods and Watergate, Nixon, and all that. But now I see, having listened to some of the prior discussion, it's not that clear because there are many other things that could obscure them in the meantime. The other idea is that, this may be something, not a smoking gun, but this may be the thing that finally tips the house of cards in the other direction. But it doesn't have to be one thing, and we all tend to think, not we all, but many people tend to say, it's got to be, the emails or the tapes or in this case, Epstein, this may do it, or if it doesn't, there are dozens of other really important issues. For me, it's the pardons. The pardon is the most glaring. If there's a way to somehow put focus on how it's undermined the whole justice system. And they all do it, but he's really done it. To just blanket pardon 3,000 people and many other glaring examples. But anyway, my question about the provenance, maybe that's important too, because if he's not so confident. I think once he makes a decision, that's it. He's going to go with it. But he may have finally made the bet on the wrong horse here. Anyway, that's why I'd appreciate that.
Dave, thank you very much. Yeah, and so Dave's got those two questions in there, Eleanor, and this may not, there are bigger democracy issues, I think he's suggesting, than this, even though obviously anybody connected with what Jeffrey Epstein did, is in a group of horrible people. The pardons, and I guess kind of moving Ghislaine Maxwell to this country club type prison after she met with, was it the Attorney General herself, and said Trump didn't do anything. So there's, of course, the whole huge list of democracy issues. And yet, I think sometimes just at a gut level, human beings pay more attention to something like sex trafficking and sexual abuse of minors than things that may seem more abstract, even if they have implications for many, 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 many more people, like the plundering of democracy.
Absolutely. I mean, we're having some of these same questions about so many other parts of the federal government under the second Trump administration. It's not just whether or not the Justice Department would comply with legislation forcing them to release all of these documents on Jeffrey Epstein. It's also whether they're, doing what they've historically done in every other administration and so many other aspects as well. And we've mentioned in passing some of those very same examples, whether that's using the Justice Department to prosecute political enemies or the Federal Housing Finance Agency to come after Federal Reserve governors. So it's a long list there, and certainly, indicative of a bigger, more structural issue than just how this administration is responding to the Epstein files.
And on the earlier caller's question about why these files weren't released under Democratic presidents Obama and Biden, one listener writes, as to Obama, there was a secret deal between Acosta's office and Epstein. Acosta was the U.S. attorney, I believe, in Florida at the time. If that would have even been under Obama's watch, I'm not sure. And it says, as to Biden, there was a criminal trial going on, Maxwell. And if the caller is right on either of those things, the texter, and you can comment, if they're right on Biden, then it adds even more credence to the fact that Trump may have gotten Pam Bondi to launch this investigation of Democrats, a criminal probe, to give him another excuse not to release the files. But do you know if it's accurate? During Biden, there was a criminal trial going on of Ghislaine Maxwell, and that was why Biden couldn't release the files?
That is a great question that I admit that I do not know the answer to. I do know that Acosta testified before the House Oversight Committee earlier this year, and or rather interviewed privately, so private testimony. And the Republicans' takeaway afterward was that he basically exonerated Trump. He never spoke to Trump in his capacity of conducting this investigation into Epstein. And so that's been his role most recently in the case. And admittedly, I do not know the logistics of, what that investigation meant about releasing the files in previous administrations.
Right. And just a little more on Acosta. I believe he was the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida when the deal was struck to prosecute Epstein on minor charges in 2008. So that would have been under Bush, not under Obama. But then there is also a Politico story from just October 17th, a few weeks ago. Alex Acosta cleared Trump of wrongdoing in the Epstein case. So, a lot of unanswered questions and questions that we may or may not get the answer to, and then see what consequences they have for Trump or anybody else involved. Now, when we continue in a minute, we'll turn to two other topics front and center now after the Democratic wave in the election. Trump announces reversal of some tariffs because of affordability concerns. Remember that word came up maybe a few times in the campaigns of people like Mikey Sherrill and Zohran Mamdani, affordability. And what will happen now with the Obamacare subsidies that the Democrats made this shutdown about? And listeners, we can take comments or questions about those things. 212-433 WNYC, 212-433-9692, as we continue with Eleanor Mueller from Semafor. And we're going to play, we've played some really interesting clips already regarding the Epstein and Trump situation. Wait till you hear what we've got of Chip Roy and Hakeem Jeffries coming up after the break. Brian Lehrer on WNYC. We continue with our usual Monday morning politics segment, national politics. And there is so much of it today with Eleanor Mueller, congressional reporter for Semafor. Eleanor, you wrote about food tariff reversals. What did Trump announce?
So Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent signaled last week this would be on the horizon. And then on Friday, the Trump administration made it official. They said that they would lift tariffs on key groceries, including coffee, bananas, tomatoes, in an effort to alleviate some of the price increases that customers have seen since they went into effect. This mirrors legislation that a bipartisan pair of senators introduced last month. Democratic Senator Catherine Cortez Masto and Republican Senator Rand Paul, both vocal critics of the administration's tariffs, wrote a bill to do just this. So this is something that the administration has been facing pressure on for quite some time. And to your point about the Friday news dump, on Friday said, we are in fact going to walk back some of these things because we want to make sure that Americans aren't hurting too much at the grocery store.
So he flipped on Epstein and he flipped on this flip, tariffs, in one weekend's time. Why on the tariffs, politically speaking?
Clearly, the administration is feeling pressured to improve affordability. Trump has said publicly Americans are doing great. The economy is doing great. That is, of course, the same thing that got former President Joe Biden in trouble, was telling Americans who are struggling that actually you're wrong. The economy is fantastic. And so he's taken some actions that have shown us he might not personally, privately think that, life is quite so great for Americans economically. He said that he wanted to look into cutting Americans a check of tariff revenue. That's something, of course, that they need Congress to do, most likely, but nonetheless, they're talking about it. And now, of course, this reversal of tariffs on groceries.
And he had, as your article points out, previously called the idea that there's an affordability problem a, quote, con job by the Democrats. But now apparently it's not a con job anymore because he cited affordability in this reversal. Specifically, beef, coffee, and I think the third category was tropical fruits. It wasn't bananas in particular, but there are no U.S. grown bananas, I don't believe. I think all, America. A friend of mine who was an immigrant from Ireland, Eleanor, once said one of the first things that struck her about the United States is how many bananas people are eating all the time. And there are no domestic bananas. So tropical fruits, I presume, refers largely to bananas.
Yeah, same goes for coffee. This was, Senator Rand Paul's point when he introduced that bill last month was we're not protecting American jobs when we place these, dramatic restrictions on things like coffee and bananas. These are things that we've historically needed to bring in from other places.
So is he just going food by food? Newsday, Long Island's newspaper, has a story now about Long Island Italian restaurants gearing up for a possible doubling of pasta prices due to possible tariffs. So I guess those might still be on. I can't tell for sure. But is this whack-a-mole tariff reversals food by food?
We're going to have to see, but it certainly does make it tough for the administration to back up the argument that it's been making over the last several months, which is that, in fact, the companies are the ones that are going to be absorbing these cost increases. If you feel the need to reverse tariffs on groceries because you feel like they're causing customers to pay too much at the grocery store, then of course it's tough to also argue that, people actually aren't seeing their costs go up at all.
Listener writes, by the way, one other thing about Epstein and Congress. If Representative Sherrill, who was just elected governor of New Jersey and announced she's resigning from Congress this week so she can prepare to take that job. If Representative Sherrill resigns her seat this week as planned, does that negate her signature on the Epstein files discharge petition, putting it back below the required number? What would you say to that listener?
The consensus, as far as I've heard it from House leaders, is that no, that is not a problem, in part because the discharge petition's point was to force the vote. And in theory, it could have taken, the rules outline 7 legislative days, 2 days after that to actually come to the floor. What Speaker Mike Johnson said last week was, let's just get this thing over with. And that's why we're seeing a vote this week. So because the vote is already in motion, already scheduled, it won't actually matter if that discharge petition loses any signatures because it's already done what it set out to do.
And another listener, Paul from Jersey City, texts, let's all keep in mind regarding Trump's reluctance to release the Epstein files, we are talking about a man who himself is a convicted, at least civilly, sexual harasser. And there was, of course, the E. Jean Carroll case. I think it's not called a conviction. I think it's called found liable for, but found liable by a jury of sexual abuse. So some context there on Trump for anybody who wants to read into his Epstein positions, a possible connection there. And health care. After the shutdown, Democrats want to vote in the House on an Affordable Care Act or Obamacare, same thing. Subsidy extension. Most of our listeners know that. I'm going to play parts of an exchange on that in the House that involves a Republican and 2 Democrats. Listen first to Republican Chip Roy of Texas, who is against voting to extend the subsidies. And this is new. This is once Congress came back after the shutdown ended. Congressman Chip Roy.
Insurance companies, 1,032% stock prices up since 2010, 448% up from 2013. 85% of the revenues for insurers come from the federal government. What my Democratic colleagues are proposing is an insurance company enrichment scheme. It's literally what they're doing, is printing money in the Treasury and giving it to insurance companies. That's their solution for healthcare. Enriching insurance companies that are the very people that are telling the American people which care they can get and not get. There's no chance for an American to go to the doctor of his or her choice. There's no chance for them to go get care. There was no chance for my constituent who lives near Fredericksburg, Texas, to go to MD Anderson to get care because she's on Obamacare, which can't go to MD Anderson.
Or that particular private insurance plan that the person bought on the Obamacare exchange has their list of doctors and hospitals that people can go to. That's true. That's a real thing. And the response from Democrats Mary Kay Scanlon of Pennsylvania teeing up Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries came after that.
Have our Republican colleagues ever been able to produce a plan that would provide the kind of coverage for Americans, affordable coverage, that the Affordable Care Act did?
You know, it's very interesting that my colleague from Texas wanted to sit there and lecture both Catherine Clark and I, but couldn't see fit to ask us a single question, engage in a debate. Where y'all been, bro? You've been out for 7 weeks. You don't have the time to have a back and forth? We hear you rant for a few minutes, basically threaten to repeal the Affordable Care Act and then don't want to defend that position? You should feel free to defend that position. You've done it 70 times. And if you think that's on the right side of the American people, then fine. That's your plan. Repeal and displace tens of millions of people. That's the Republican plan.
Hakeem Jeffries. So, Eleanor, where does this stand? We talked a lot about on the show the Senate deal, the Democrats, enough Democrats being willing to make a deal to end the government shutdown in exchange for the promise that there will be a vote on extending the subsidies in the Senate. But Speaker Mike Johnson in the House never promised such a vote in the House. Those Democrats were willing to go forward anyway. So there's no promise of a vote in the House to extend the subsidies. But the Democrats are trying to force one with, again, like forcing the Epstein vote. This is a parliamentary term that most people never have to know. A discharge petition, a discharge petition. So this is where we're at with this. Maybe you can explain.
Yeah, this is another reason why the administration is facing so much pressure on affordability is because of these enhanced Affordable Care Act subsidies that are supposed to expire at the end of the year. This was what was at the core of the disagreement over government funding that kept us shut down for the longest amount of time in U.S. history. The senators who agreed to reopen the government, I mean, there were only 8 of them who caucused with Democrats. This was what they accepted, was the promise of a vote in December on a bill to extend the subsidies that they approve. The problem is that House Republicans made no such concession. And in fact, Speaker Mike Johnson, when he came back to the Hill after the agreement was struck, said repeatedly that not only had he not agreed to hold any kind of vote, but he would not agree to hold any kind of vote. I think that from leaders' perspective, there is a widely held reluctance within the House Republican Conference to implicitly support any form of Obamacare, including voting to extend these subsidies, and also a great deal of difficulty when it comes to threading the needle on some kind of change that could bring down the cost to the way that fiscal hawks want, whether that's by an income cap or a measure to address fraud, like requiring a minimum copay or a deductible. And so we're seeing now the Senate and House on 2 dramatically different tracks. Senate Republicans really rushing to get, if not a bipartisan product by December, which seems like a heavy lift, but a Republican product that they can put on the floor at the same time as the Democratic bill. And the House is in a much earlier stage of its negotiations. So I was talking to someone about this last week who works on these issues. on K Street and asked them what they make of, the House and the Senate being on different timelines and whether that was a positive thing. They said, not if you want a result. So that's where we're at right now. It's not looking too good.
Well, to Hakeem Jeffrey's point, that the Republicans, what did he call it? Repeal and displace, repeal Obamacare, Affordable Care Act, and displace those millions of Americans who get their health insurance that way and can afford it, even if barely, because of the subsidies. His point being repeal and displace, they don't have a plan. They don't have an alternative plan. So if Chip Roy pointed out a real problem with just about any private insurance, that they have lists of doctors in hospitals that you can use and ones that are not in plan that you can't use or have to pay an arm and a leg for to use. What's the Republicans' plan for making that better for patients in America and people getting well care?
This is the same fight that Republicans on the Hill have been having for 15 years now. And this is one of the biggest fault lines we're seeing emerge is that we have moderate Republicans, blue state Republicans who are saying, let's just, at least for the short term, at least making some changes, extend these enhanced tax credits. And then on the other hand, folks like the chair of the Senate Health Committee, Bill Cassidy, saying, well, what if we made bigger reforms instead? And so that is a much more complicated, much more time-intensive question for Republicans specifically to answer. This is something that they've been struggling to do for a decade and a half. And whether or not they can even agree on one solution, let alone get it across the finish line, is a huge, huge question for them to answer in the next few months here.
Anybody, including Democrats, considering all this, talking anew about Bernie Sanders-style Medicare for all?
I think with a Republican White House, and Senate, there's an understanding that that is not something that's in the cards, at least for the next couple of years. But I will say that it is certainly being talked about in the political context of making sure that voters understand who held the majority when these subsidies lapsed, when folks' premiums went up. And as they're looking at, either being stretched incredibly thin to afford the healthcare costs next year, or even having to make the difficult choice to go without health insurance because they can't afford it.
Eleanor Mueller, congressional reporter for Semafor. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Brian.